Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you again for another Film Fanatic show. It is 10:51 on a beautiful but slightly chilly, well, normal October morning or October day. Hope everyone's doing good. Yeah, so I had to go up to my orthodontist yesterday in Bangor and got my mouth destroyed for a while, but afterwards I was like, okay, I got to treat myself to something good after something terrible. So I went to my favorite place, of course, my home away from home, and that, of course, is Bull Moose. Again, I want to thank. Before I get into this, I got some killer movies. Before I get into talking about this fabulous movie I got and movies, I want to thank the folks who have been commenting on the videos and some new subscribers that we got this week. Super cool. Getting close to 600 subscribers, so really, really nice. Also, I did a video yesterday. Actually, I recorded it a few days ago and uploaded it yesterday. Yesterday, I think it was yesterday morning, where I did a video on a response to what Ridley Scott, the famous director, said in regards to new movies that come out and all those things. And so that got an interesting response from some people. So I appreciate people chiming in and talking about those things. I Ridley Scott had basically said, kind of attacked and destroyed Hollywood and just movies in general, saying that new movies that come out are just either mediocre, or he even described them as shit. And then he even said in this interview that he for his own pleasure he watches his own movies, and he was boasting on how they age so well and they're so great. And it really irritated me. I try not, movies are movies. Movies are entertainment first and foremost, and it's supposed to be fun. The best form of healthy escapism. And it's cathartic. I think with horror films, it's one of the, I look at it as first and foremost for its like the entertainment value, and it's fun. It's like going into a haunted house or going to an amusement park. Same thing for me. But, on a slightly deeper level, I think watching horror films, getting into the whole aesthetic, the whole world, I think it's really cathartic. I think it's, in a lot of ways, you know, we all have our demons. We all have these things that we struggle with as human beings. Some have more than others. But I think all of those things are tied into the feeling of fear. And I've been doing a lot of audiobooks lately, and I've been checking out a lot of books by one of my favorite psychotherapists, Carl Jung, and he talks a lot about the shadow. Being in tune with that darkness, but then also realizing that that is kind of a natural component of who we are as human beings. And with that entails fear of the unknown. And so I do think on a deeper level, horror films help deal with those kinds of issues or things that are natural for us to feel, fear, trepidation, alienation, if you will, all kinds of psychological things that we have that can be hang-ups. But I think in a lot of ways, on a deeper level, a lot of these films help us kind of face those fears and to tackle them kind of head on, but in a very kind of controlled way, a very healthy way. No one's getting hurt. You're not hurting yourself. And I think it's therapeutic in a lot of ways. But anyway, so I went to Blue Moose yesterday to celebrate my me surviving, and I got some killer movies. I probably the last 5 years or so, it was really well, it was really during COVID when I really started to become a big time collector of movies. I've always bought movies, my whole life, and always, collected mostly DVDs for years. And then I got into Blu-rays about 8 years ago or so. Got into the Blu-ray craze pretty late in the game, after they kind of hit and got, really popular, and they still are, but it's a very different time. But it was during COVID when I started really getting into movies, buying, especially exploitation movies. And again, it's something I've always done, and it's something they're movies I've always loved. I grew up watching them, and I had a pretty decent amount of those movies, a lot on VHS, and then some on DVD. But I've made that big transition of going full bore into buying Blu-rays when it comes to that world. And when I go to Bull Moose, I specifically will try to seek out the trashiest movie that I can find. And I usually, because I've been buying, I kind of feel like at this point I'm kind of an somewhat experienced buyer, and I kind of know my own taste and I know what to look for. I don't usually go there with any like a list of movies that I'm looking for. I love being surprised. I love discovering a movie and looking at the artwork, and I'm just like, okay, that looks amazing. I'm going to buy it. And with that, with some experience of buying movies for quite a few years, especially in the exploitation world, I've discovered a lot of labels that are just incredible. And I've done multiple shows on my favorite label, Mondo Macabra. So I came across this one movie from 1971, and it was a brand new Mondo Macabra release. I have a ton of Mondo Macabra movies, and also the other movie I bought, which is a collection or a compilation, is another Severin. It's a Severin box set, and I don't really have too many. I do have some really good box sets, but I don't really have. I don't believe I have any Severin box sets. They have a ton of them. The most recent or not, it's not a Severin. I can't remember what label put it out, but I do have a Paul Naschy box set that I bought last year, or actually earlier this year, with a collection of about 6 Paul Naschy films. That is absolutely incredible. But this was my first Severin box set, so really awesome. But today's movie, what I'm going to talk about, is this movie, which is so outrageous and so amazing. Girl Slaves of Morgana Lafey, and it came out in 1971. And it's a French gothic horror exploitation movie. And it's very sexy. It's an incredibly sexy film, as you can kind of tell. But at the same time, it's so gorgeous and beautiful, mysterious, and bizarro. It's a wild movie, and it came out in '71. Again, I came across, like I said before, I have a lot of experience, I think, now, like looking out for a lot of these cool movies, and especially when it comes to movies I've never seen. And I came across this, this was the first movie I came across when I started looking for movies, and it was a Mondo Macabro title. And I was like, I don't have this, I'm buying it. So that's how quickly that decision was made. Because I have tons of Mondo Macabro now, and they're my favorite label. I'd say probably my second favorite label at this point, just because I have so many titles, is Severin. I really love Severin, and I really love Blue Underground. I haven't bought any Blue Underground in a while. They're a little bit harder to find, it seems, at least in my travels. But I love that label to death. There's so many great labels out there. This movie, again, it came out in '71. It was directed by Bruno Gantelin, and there's a really cool interview with him on here that was done in the early 2000s. The premise of this movie is just spectacular. There's the basic premise, or the overview of this film. 2 French women get lost in the woods, and accidentally enter the realm of sorceress Morgana Lafey, who gives them the choice of either staying young forever as her lovers or rot in her dungeon for eternity. And it's definitely well, there's a lot of sex, but it's not like overt. Um, it's more implied. Like there's a lot of nudity, there is a lot of sex in this movie, but it's not like compared to say certain other kinds of exploitation movies. Like one movie that I did watch, and I just uploaded a version of it. And this movie is way more graphic and more brutal. It's not so much a sensual thing. It's very psychosexual, and it's kind of a disturbing movie. And the sex element of this film, the demoniacs, which I just uploaded another video for this because I have multiple versions of this movie, and I wanted to talk about the other alternate versions. The demoniacs, which came out in '74, is another French movie. That movie is very much more. Well, it's harder to watch. It's brutal, and there's a lot of rape scenes in it. But it's a horror movie too, and it's ultimately kind of a. Well, it ultimately is a revenge film, which is great because the people who are these rapist scumbags in the movie, they all get what they deserve at the end. But the sexual nature of the film is very graphic, and it is generally hard to watch. But again, it's got this thing of where there's so many cool sequences with the cinematography and everything, and it's beautifully shot. And the sex in the girl slaves of Morgana Le Fay it's more sensual. There is a lot of nudity, there is a lot of sex, but it's a little bit more. Well, it's sensual. It's not done in a way of where it's non-consensual, I guess, between the characters more or less, and it's a little bit more erotic and mysterious, um, and definitely, like I said, sensual. And but it's not. I wouldn't say it's not. It's definitely not a pornography film. It's not. I don't know. I'd say that this could be considered a sex exploitation movie, and it's definitely a horror film. But it has this really cool, subtle kind of flavor throughout the whole movie. In the special features on this disc, there's a really cool interview, like I said, with Bruno Gantelin. I think that's how you pronounce his name. Yeah, Bruno Gantelin. There's a really cool interview with him where he talks about where he wanted to, even though this movie is very erotic and sexuality is a major part of this movie, he wanted it to be more sensual. And he even says, like, a term that I always use a lot, like the whole kind of concept of, at the end of the day, you can have things that are extreme and kind of aggressively in your face, and and maybe where there's times of where there isn't so much subtlety, but at the end of the day, he was saying this thing that I really believe in. Less, the whole idea of less is more. Like what you don't actually see is actually more, and you, as a viewer, when you're not shown everything, especially when you're not visually shown everything, and then I think narratively when you're not being told everything, but especially, well, both of those things I think it applies, but less is more. So as a viewer, like in my experience watching this movie, it leads more up to your imagination, and it makes it for a more interesting kind of experience because you you fill in some of the blanks with your imagination, and it gives it more of a literary feel because that's a lot of the times the power of the written word when it comes to books is that. So, and when that's applied to film, I think it's really effective, really really effective. And so he set out to make this movie not quite so envelope pushing as far as that, like compared to, like I was talking about, the movie The Demoniacs when it came to the actual sexual content. Um, And this movie is really interesting. Like the cast is amazing in this movie. This was his first film. The cast for this movie is really top notch, beautifully shot. The cinematography is really great. The music is really awesome. It's all shot in this like beautiful kind of forest, and these, with the backdrop being in the woods, and where all of these like really cool kind of mountainous landscapes. Really, really cool. Really beautiful. Bruno also talks about he wanted to set out this film with a movie that pretty much just has an entirely female cast, which is something you don't see very often, and especially back in the 70s. The cast is amazing. Muriel Salonen, Dominique Dalfrey is it plays Morgana, the sorceress, the mistress is just absolutely stunning and amazing. Michelle Perrelli, Ursula Pauli, Alfred Ballou is kind of the only male character in the whole film who plays kind of this like henchman for the sorceress. Solon Prado and Pamela Stanford. But again, I've never seen this movie before, and it's amazing. I was blown away. It's got a very slow pace to it. It's a very slow film, and it has this very relaxing vibe to it. But it's incredible. It's got an abundance of, well, sensuality, obviously, and but it's got this very interesting kind of mixture I think like kind of classic horror aesthetics. At one point you could look at this film being kind of about it definitely has a vampire vibe or aesthetic to it. Like you could see the film being really centered on Morgana Le Fay being this vampire character, because there's a lot of tropes taken from vampire lore in this film. It has a very gothic vibe to it as well. She does have this giant castle in the woods that she lives in, so there is this Dracula kind of comparison, which is very, very cool. But it's never you're never completely told, or there isn't that reveal in the film either way. Like it's kind of mysterious, and I like I like that it has that element. And the other thing about it is that Morgana is really a witch who has all of these nymphs as these like, well, sex slaves. And there's this idea of where one of the scenes, one of the girls is like coerced to believe if she becomes one of her minions, Morgana's minions, she will have life everlasting, basically get the gift of eternal life. And if she refuses, she will like, well, more or less die an old hag in her dungeon. So there's that the immortality aspect, and she's like drinking from this chalice that looks like blood. So there's that, which is again another thing very much tied to the vampire world or mythology. But it never goes into a place explaining, well, she is a vampire, where she like suddenly makes, there's this big reveal where she has these fangs and she is like sucking the blood out of the necks of the women, or um, you know crucifixes, and there's no, it's really subtle, but it's definitely there, which I really liked. And it also plays a lot with this idea that this woman Morgana is a very powerful witch that lives in the woods, and it has a very kind of like folkloric witch kind of mythology tied to it as well. And I like that it combines a lot of those elements from like kind of classic folk horror that involves witchcraft, and then it could be also, there's also components of like taken from vampire lore or vampire mythology, but yet it's never really defined as necessarily one over the other or one or the other, which is really cool. It kind of borrows a lot from that. And the movie is also very, very psychedelic too. It, again, came out in '71, the tail end of the crazy '60s, and so hippie love was, I think it's kind of a product of the time, where there's a, underneath the whole kind of veneer or the whole kind of external thing of flower power and free sex and love and happiness, and underneath there's this kind of dark underbelly, and this movie definitely has that very dark underbelly to it, which is really cool. And again, it's another aspect of the movie where it's kind of subtle, but it's there. And this movie is really good at just having all of these little subtle things, when it tackles the sensuality, the eroticism, kind of the psychedelic element, coming out of the '60s, and it has this very dark kind of component underneath it all. Again, another subtle thing, and it has the folkloric witchcraft kind of vibe. Again, very subtle, and then also the vampire mythology. Again, very subtle, all kind of put together, and very cool. I love that it has, it has all those elements. I couldn't say that this is a definitive vampire movie. I couldn't say that this is a movie definitively about a witch. It has all of those things. And again, it's a horror movie too. It's definitely a horror movie, but yet it's also very subtle. And but that being all said, I don't think a movie, because so much of the sex is implied, but yet it's there. There's a lot of nudity in this film. I don't think this movie would be really released, could be released today in a lot of ways. I don't think it would be considered politically correct, if you will. Even though, again, it's got all these different elements, but it's handled really subtly for what it is. It's still, this movie definitely is an exploitation movie, and it is very trashy, but in a different way. But the cinematography is amazing. I love the whole world. It's very believable, and I love that this film was shot. There was no, like, watching this little interview with the director. Bruno Gontalon, he talks a lot about trying to, kind of more or less tote this line. But I still think with the sexual aspects, I don't think this film probably could be made today. But awesome movie. And again, this is another movie that I've never seen before. I can't recommend it enough. And again, I can't believe this came out in '71. I mean, the transfer of this movie on Blu-ray is astoundingly beautiful. Can't recommend this movie enough. Mondo Macabre, this is another reason why Mondo Macabre just rules. They just crank out all these amazing movies. They're the best. So thanks again, and we will see you next time. Peace.